This is Bob Brewer with Braumiller Law Group and Braumiller Consulting Group. Welcome to the podcast. With me once again for part two on our tariff discussion is Jim Holbein, our counsel in D.C. Hey, Jim.
How you doing, Bob?
Hanging in there, man. So this one we're going to just go ahead and title Terrified by Tariffs. As a lot of us still are. Yeah. So give us an overview of just tariffs globally right now, Jim.
Okay. So the administration is aggressively pursuing their America First trade strategy that they are authorizing tariffs as a trade remedy to mitigate. Tariffs are generally authorized for things like anti-dumping and countervailing duties, Section 301 tariffs for unfair trade practices, Section 232, and the president's using something called IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, to impose tariffs on countries all over the world because there's an international economic emergency caused by trade deficits with all these countries. And so that's the emergency that's been declared and the basis for doing that. As a consequence, like 70 or 80 countries were hit with large tariffs out of the box. And then with the outcry that came about and the immediate tanking in the Wall Street, the stock market really fell as a consequence of that announcement, rolled them immediately back to 10%, called reciprocal tariffs, because it's dealing with the reciprocal bilateral trade with each country. But it was applied uniformly across many countries. And China tariffs were jumped up to about 145%, including tariffs that were residual from his first administration. Mexico and Canada are both paying 25% tariffs, but they're getting duty-free treatment. They rolled that back to get duty-free treatment for goods that originate within North America. And that's been very helpful. That mitigates the costs for a lot of goods that are coming through. And he's also put on steel and aluminum tariffs, and on both steel, aluminum, and their derivatives, and on autos and auto parts. And they've been addressing it by looking at taking stacking away. So it's not multiple tariffs. There's going to be a base tariff rate for all countries. How that applies varies by country. So it's a fairly robust program that has, remember this is one of the most important takeaways. Tariffs are paid by the importer. They're not paid by the exporting country. They're paid by the importing company. So these tariffs are a tax on American companies importing into the United States and selling into the commercial marketplace. So all of these tariffs have an impact on the entire economy. That's why there's been so much worry in Wall Street and so much concern. But we'll see. There have been recent announcements. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. And still, everybody, keep in mind that the economy in China is not all that great right now either. I mean, some of these factories in China are like, this is not good at all for us. I had 75 employees the other day. I'm down to 30 now because of this.
Right.
Ships were pulling up at the Los Angeles port half empty. So China's the target, obviously, for the highest tariffs. But can you kind of talk about dealing with the Chinese suppliers in this new environment that I just mentioned?
Yeah, it's been interesting. China's taken a lot of measures to try to help themselves because, notwithstanding their standing up to the U.S., their economy has suffered a bit, and they cannot find enough buyers in the rest of the world for all the goods that they were producing to go to the United States before.
Yeah.
So that's a drain on their economy for sure. What's going on now? There was an agreement announced yesterday that the U.S. and China, the worst tariffs are being dropped. They're having a base of 10%, but the president removed all the 2025 tariffs that have been applied since he took office this term. But all the tariffs that were applied to China in the first term, 2016 to 2020, are still in place. He's not touching those. So China still faces a tariff wall that they've had the last 5 years. Or 6 years, I think it is now. So that's still in place. And then there's the additional 10% on top of that. The Chinese removed all the retaliatory tariffs so that they're down to just 10% on U.S. goods. and they've given themselves 90 days to negotiate an agreement that will address things. Um, it's what do we do as suppliers? Well, suppliers are going to be able to ship to the United States. Under the prior regime, they pretty much accommodated all those tariffs and worked on their pricing so they were competitive. So I think that working with your suppliers, you can then, you know, be fairly sure for at least the next 3 months that you're going to have stable tariffs at a much lower rate, and they should be able to accommodate that and work with you. Longer term, however, it really does depend on whether they can come in with an agreement in 90 days, or they extend it if they've made enough progress that they'll extend it again. All this kind of up, and there's an uncertainty as to how long this will last and what the tariff rates will finally settle on for everybody going back and forth. So for both exporters and importers, that uncertainty is difficult. So if you have a supplier that can get you your goods in 90 days or less, I would order now
Yeah.
because, get it done while you can and it's cheaper because you just don't know whether it's going to continue.
I don't know. From my perspective, I thought that, first of all, slapping the tariffs on all of these different countries and then doing what we did with China, I mean, it kind of opened the door for China to go, do business with a lot of other countries that may have been apprehensive at any point. Say, wow, look what the U.S. just did. They don't seem to be that friendly. So it really opens the door for China. I'd like to see the map in about another 6 months to a year as to who's really doing business with who, how much it's come down between the economies with the U.S. and China, as a result of this.
Well, and we made the administrations, both Trump and Biden, had made a lot of progress in painting China as the world's economic villain,
Yeah,
that they were playing fairly. And they were right. I mean, it wasn't just a story, it's the truth.
right,
They were
right.
not playing fairly. They were stealing IP and just paying no fees for it and then putting it into their own economy, just thieving. I mean, taking it. It's not appropriate. It's not the right way to go. And lots of barriers on, threatening people with their exports of critical minerals, um, you know, pulling those critical minerals in and forcing production of lots of stuff, solar cells, and a lot of other high tech products had to be done in China. They're not playing exactly fairly with the rest of the world. Now, with the Trump tariffs, there was a real question. Geez, are they really the bad guys, or is the U.S. a bully and a bad guy too? What's
Yeah,
what's going on? That's a problem that
yes, it is.
we need to resolve, and we need to come to an agreement that continues to not paint, but force, not even forces, and have China voluntarily
There you go.
playing fairly,
That's the
you
word.
know, and use diplomacy in the correct way to get them to honor the commitments they made when they joined the World Trade Organization, for
Yeah,
example. We've honored those in the breach. They haven't. The WTO is a toothless tiger. It has
yeah.
proven useless.
Useless. I know. I got you. And we're the ones that brought them into the WTO to begin with, the U.S.
Well, sort of, yeah,
Yeah,
and we rushed that deal,
yeah,
and there were a lot of opponents. One of the biggest opponents was Bob Lighthizer, who was the USTR in the first term,
yeah,
and he's
yeah.
still an advisor to the Trump administration now. Really, really adamant that China is not playing fairly and doesn't trust, and the whole America First piece on China is written by his guys.
Yeah. What about the big picture on the tariffs on sectors like autos, steel, and aluminum?
Well, those are there has been, let's deal with steel and aluminum first, because a lot of steel and aluminum goes into autos. And there has been a worldwide overcapacity in steel and aluminum for decades.
Yeah.
And I mean, China has ways of they can produce as much steel as the entire world needs and more. And all the other countries producing on top, it's keeping prices low. It's keeping quality sometimes not what it should be. The U.S. has lost. Big foundry steel is gone. Big foundry aluminum is gone. And we have arc furnaces still, and we still have real specialty steel that we make here in the United States, but it's a much, much, much smaller industry. And that's where a lot of the manufacturing and production type jobs that were in the Midwest in particular. That's what the Rust Belt. They're gone. Pittsburgh doesn't have steel mills anymore. That's what they were famous for.
Yeah.
So that has been the reason for the tariffs, is that we lost that industry in this huge overcapacity. And so they're trying to limit it and try to bring some of that production back to the United States. A lot of steel and aluminum goes into autos, and auto trade has been one where we in this country buy a lot more foreign-made autos than any other country buys of U.S. type vehicles at all. U.S.-made vehicles. We're not being with tariff barriers and other kind of non-tariff barriers. We're just not as competitive in industry in the rest of the world as we should be. And certainly as would be justified by the size and quality of the vehicles that we produce. And so therefore, they're really trying to address that, and they're putting tariffs on European autos, on Chinese, Korea, everybody's going to be paying more, and on auto parts. It really hits Canada and Mexico the hardest because we had under the NAFTA and then USMCA, we had developed a continental auto industry, an auto parts industry, that goods were moving freely across the border and no tariffs applied. So it was much easier to trade and do the higher value goods and production in the United States, do the things that were more labor intensive or, simpler, if you will, in Canada and Mexico. And that has been impacted by these tariffs. But there has been a fair amount of the administration seems to be listening to the big sectors like autos. And so they're helping them, and they're between the U.S. and Canada and U.S. and Mexico, there is some agreements in place to help them to an extent.
Yeah, because I read an article not too recently. It was almost as though it's cheaper to buy a foreign auto right now than it is one that's made within the USMCA.
Well, yeah, and
they were upset.
That wasn't the case before the new tariffs.
Yeah.
Before the new tariffs, we were competitive in the United States with all the other countries.
Yep.
And except on trucks. My goodness, trucks are swimming out the track. I was trying to buy a vehicle with my son the other day.
I'm gonna quote the president right now on one that he's saying, all these countries are calling me and just kissing my ass. So with all this ass kissing behind the scenes that's going on, Jim, how do you see this kind of playing out?
I think that there's going to be agreements with a lot of countries. You got to deal with the U.S. and U.K. to sign the deal, and that will address autos and auto parts. It'll address Rolls-Royce engines coming into the aircraft industry, lots of other stuff. It's not unlike the deal with China in that it's kind of a framework, but they're going to take some time to flesh it out and turn it into more. And have some real bite to it. And they're going to commit to buy more autos and make that possible, more U.S. origin autos. And so that, I think, is going to be a constructive thing. I think the EU is going to need to do the same thing with us. I think they need to open their market.
We didn't get the details on that one, but remember the phone call came into the White House with him sitting at the desk, thanking him for such a historic deal, but we don't have the details on that. We don't have the details on China and the U.S. I still have no idea at this juncture what the Penguins have concluded about as far as retaliatory tariffs on that island way out in wherever the hell it was. I don't know, but the Penguins were pissed. The Penguins were pissed. All right, well, Jim, I like to keep these to around 15 minutes, as you know. I really appreciate you stopping in, giving us more than your 2 cents on all this that's going on. It's insane. But hey, thanks again, man.
You're very welcome, Bob. Thank you.
All right. Bye. See you later, everybody.